This is Edward October, host of OctoberPod on YouTube. Hear that jingle jingle? It could be Kris Kringle, or a home invader looking for an open window, a jilted lover looking for revenge, or a disgruntled coworker hoping to spike your eggnog with arsenic. The girls of our true crime podcast are always on Santa's nice list, but the crimes they discuss are very naughty indeed. Listener discretion is advised.
Hey, Jen.
Hey, Cam. Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas. Happy
It's
holidays.
so
Happy Hanukkah.
close.
All that stuff.
Everything ready and go? Everything ready to go? Listen to me slurring my words. It's like I've been drinking all night.
Day 10.
Are you guys ready?
Yes.
All right. This one's really new. And here in the United States, totally had never heard of it. And it is horrifying. Trust me, I can't believe we didn't hear about it. I don't know if it didn't play down here. It was pretty big. It's in Canada. It was pretty big up there, but never heard a word of it down here.
Uh-oh.
September 3rd, 2022 was a gorgeous day on the wide open Canadian prairie. But 32-year-old Myles Sanderson was not interested in the blue skies or the warm weather. The day before, Myles had assaulted his ex-partner and mother of his children, Vanessa Burns, and he tried to run her over with a car. He left her with 2 black eyes and several swollen knots on her forehead. In recent years, Damian Sanderson, the 31-year-old younger brother of Myles, had become increasingly alarmed by his brother's behavior, and by the time the sun would set on the vast northern landscape of the next day, Damian's concerns would prove to be warranted. The province of Saskatchewan became a territory in 1905 and was sparsely populated, just 1.2 million people, almost half of which live in the lower part of the province. Known as the land of the living skies, Saskatchewan is huge, just slightly smaller than the U.S. state of Texas. It borders the U.S. states of Montana and North Dakota. Located northwest of Melfort, the James Cree Nation Reserve is a small community of about 2,000 indigenous people on the Saskatchewan River. Gravel roads crisscross the flat, expensive wheat fields, kicking up dust every time a vehicle goes by. The territory is shared between the 3 First Nations, and I'm going to screw up the last one, and I apologize, but I looked everywhere for a pronunciation, and I could not find one. So, the 3 First Nations are James Smith Cree Nation, the Peter Chapman First Nation, and the one I'm going to say wrong is the Chakastapason First Nation, and I apologize wholly. I looked, Lauretta looked, we could not find anywhere on Google how to pronounce it. At 4:03 a.m. on September 3rd, the RCMP, which if you don't know is the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, received a call from Damian Sanderson's wife, Sky, reporting that her husband had stolen a vehicle on the reserve and that he might be impaired. Damian Sanderson struggled with addiction and anxiety and was the product of an abusive household. He'd been trying very hard to get his life back on track after some legal entanglements and drug use. Contact with his brother Myles had been sporadic since 2018, but over the summer of 2022, Myles had started showing up to their house unannounced and uninvited. Unfortunately, Myles would have a strong influence over Damian, and they were both selling and using drugs. Sky Anderson felt like the only way that she could keep the brothers from doing something stupid on that day would be to have them both thrown into jail. However, it didn't go that way. 2 RCMP officers responded at 4:15 a.m., and according to Sky, the officers found her vehicle and returned her car keys to her. But, in her opinion, they didn't do enough to locate Damian and Myles, considering that both brothers had outstanding arrest warrants. Later the next day, acquaintances dropped both brothers off at a bar at Kinestino around 1:30 in the afternoon. At this point, the brothers split up. Damien went to a different bar in town and told a woman that he and his brother had, quote, a mission, and that, quote, people would hear all about it in the next few hours. He later returned to the James Smith Cree Nation before midnight and met up with his brother Myles. They then assaulted a man, but that man didn't suffer any serious injuries. Around 3:30 a.m. on September 4th, the brothers stole a van and made their last known drug sale at 4 a.m. in the morning. A witness later described him as drinking alcohol and pumping themselves up for something. About an hour and a half later, the brothers returned to Damien's house looking for Skye. She had gone out the night before with friends and spent the night away from home. He told his 2 daughters, which were fairly young, that they would probably never see him again. Judging by pictures, one looked very small, like pre-kindergarten, and the other one looked maybe preteen. Again, at 5:40 a.m., the brothers entered the home of Martin Moostus, where Myles attacked him with a pair of scissors. And he did it allegedly because Martin owed him $50. However, for whatever reason, Damien had a change of heart and stepped in between Myles and Martin. Myles stole a knife from the kitchen, and as they were leaving, Damien told the terrified man to call the police. Once outside the house, Damien and Myles fought while sitting in the van. Myles severely injured his brother with a knife, and Damien stumbled out of the vehicle and ran into the nearby bushes, where he collapsed and died. Later, when his body was found, it appeared as though he'd been trying to make his way back to Martin Moostus' home, but succumbed to his injuries. Around 6 a.m., Myles walked to a residence on North York Road where he attacked and injured 2 people. Then he fatally attacked Christian Head, the father of Damien's wife, and Lana Head. I'm unsure if Lana is Skye's stepmom or actual mother, but she's married to Christian. Myles left in Christian Head's white Ford truck. Lana and Christian both later died from their injuries. Myles then went to the home of Gregory Burns. The 2 brothers had beat him up the night before, but ultimately let him go. And on this day, Gregory wouldn't be so lucky. Myles attacked Gregory along with his mother, Bonnie Goodvoice Burns, and Bonnie's other children. He then left, and at 6:15 a.m., Myles attacked 2 more people in their homes. He keeps breaking into homes and attacking people. 5 minutes later, Myles Sanderson made his way to his former in-laws' house, where he attacked Vanessa's parents, Earl and Joyce Burns. Now, you're going to see a lot of repeat names. It doesn't necessarily mean they're related. There's just a lot of repeating surnames on this reservation, it seems. And we couldn't really find any relation to these people. Skye had dropped Myles and Vanessa's children off there the night before. Joyce said that Sanderson had come over in the morning and she had opened the door thinking it was somebody else. When she realized it was Myles, she slammed the door in his face. But Myles kicked the door in and started slashing at Joyce. She ran to the bedroom and locked the door. He momentarily turned his attention to Earl, lunging for him by the stairs. Then Myles turned his attention back to Joyce. He busted the bedroom door down and started stabbing her in her bed. Joyce described Sanderson as looking like a zombie during the attack. He had a cigarette in his mouth the whole time he slashed at her.
What?
Joyce was stabbed in the neck, face, and stomach, where Sanderson had made sure he twisted the knife for maximum damage. In an attempt to lure Sanderson away from the house and away from his wife and grandkids, Earl, a 66-year-old school bus driver and war veteran, ran outside and started up the bus. The decoy worked and Myles ran out of the house. Earl tried to chase after him on the school bus, but it rolled into a ditch. Later, Earl would be found dead inside, and it's not known if he bled out and then wrecked, or if he crashed and then bled out. Either way, he was a hero. He saved those kids in the house. Vanessa's mother, Joyce, had a lengthy stay in the hospital, but she eventually recovered from her injuries. However, this was not the first time Myles Sanderson had tried to kill his in-laws. In 2015, Myles had repeatedly stabbed Earl with a knife, but he survived. And for that, Myles Sanderson spent only 2 years in jail.
Why?
And was released.
How?
We'll go into a little bit of that later. Myles then found himself on McLeod Street, where he entered a home and attacked Thomas Burns, Carol Burns, and 2 other men before leaving. Thomas Burns ran after him. Myles hit him with his vehicle, jumped out, and then attacked him again before leaving the scene on foot. Thomas and Carol Burns both later died. Lydia Gloria Burns, a 62-year-old addictions counselor that Damien once described as, quote, the coolest counselor he's ever met, rushed to the aid of her friend Bonnie Goodvoice Burns in response to a call for help. Bonnie and Lydia were outside administering first aid to Gregory Burns, who had been seriously injured, when Myles returned and attacked Bonnie for the second time, along with Lydia. Lydia, Bonnie, and Gregory, all 3 died while the other children were hiding indoors. Sanderson then left the reserve and drove to nearby Weldon, a village of about 160 residents located 16 miles from the James Smith Cree Reserve. Residents reported seeing him rummaging through vehicles. And at 8:19 a.m., he killed his last victim, 78-year-old Wesley Pedersen. Pedersen's 25-year-old grandson, who was hiding in the basement, called the police. In less than 3 hours, Myles Sanderson had murdered 11 people, including his brother, injured 18, stole numerous cars, and then fled the scene. And of those 18 that were injured, I believe there were like 7 or 8 of them that were in critical condition for a while.
I don't even know what to say.
I know. The carnage was spread out over 13 different locations, with Myles constantly swapping one vehicle for another and stabbing people as he went. Can you believe we never heard this in the States?
I've never heard of it. Nope.
And this was last year. It's unreal. At 17:12 a.m., the RCMP issued an emergency alert within the immediate region. 45 minutes later, that alert was expanded for the whole province. And nobody was more terrified than Vanessa Burns, whose father had been killed in the attacks, and her mother, who had been gravely injured. Now Vanessa feared that Myles would come for her next. Sanderson was at large for several days before a break and enter was reported in the town of Waukau on the 7th of September. Myles Sanderson was just seen northwest of a town armed with a knife. He had stolen a Chevrolet Avalanche, which an officer spotted at 3:17 p.m. in an unmarked police car. Sanderson was headed westbound on Highway 11 towards Rathburn. Police used a pit maneuver to direct Sanderson's vehicle into a ditch. He was apprehended at 3:28 p.m. Unfortunately, less than 6 minutes later, Myles Sanderson, quote, entered a medical distress and died while in police custody without ever having explained his motive.
I knew that was going to happen.
Mm-hmm. Many people pondered exactly what medical distress meant in this situation. Some concluded that Myles died of self-inflicted wounds. Others say that he had overdosed. Now, Vanessa Burns stated that Myles had told her that if he was ever going to end his life, that he would take a fentanyl pill.
Oh.
So he might have had one stashed, ready to go if he got caught.
I was wondering if the authorities kind of helped him out a little.
I don't know. I don't think I'd blame him much, but...
Well, and I would think they'd probably want answers too.
Right. Authorities concluded that while Damien had been involved in the, quote, initial planning and preparation for the attacks, somewhere along the line, something changed, and that his brother Myles was solely responsible for the killings. Nobody knows where Myles was during those days on the run or what he was doing. His ex-wife Vanessa believes that he'd actually been looking for her. After all, his last attack on her had been only days before, and he had a score to settle. At first, authorities were concerned that they'd find more bodies, but authorities feel certain that all the victims had been accounted for. And it was quite an investigation. There was 42 different crime scenes that they had to go through, and they had interviewed more than 250 witnesses.
Wow.
And in what would be Queen Elizabeth II's final public statement before her death, she said that she, quote, mourns with all the Canadians at this tragic time. And in a country where mass killings are relatively rare, the attacks shook the country to its core. It left everybody asking what happened and why and what went wrong. especially when Canadians discovered shortly thereafter that the RCMP had been looking for Myles since May of 2022. That's when he stopped meeting with his caseworker. The public was shocked to learn of Myles Sanderson's criminal history and how the system had so grievously failed them. When Myles was 9 years old, his parents separated. He went to live with his father and his new girlfriend. There, Myles and his siblings witnessed even more violence. Then Myles went to live with his grandparents, but again ended up in an abusive environment. And for most of his childhood, he moved back and forth between his mother's and father's houses. For several generations, the Indigenous population of Canada has suffered the impacts of the residential school system and the systematic destruction of their culture, language, and religion. Drugs and alcohol were the salve in which some chose to deal devastatingly deep wounds. For Sanderson, drugs, neglect, and violence were at the core of every household he went to. At the age of 12, Myles, following in his father's and grandfather's footsteps, started drinking alcohol and smoking marijuana. At 14, he added cocaine. The drugs fueled his anger, and he, quote, lost his mind when he partook too much. This, of course, led to 2 decades worth of violence and criminal behavior with no significant breaks. And nobody felt this more than his common-law wife, Vanessa. Her body is a literal roadmap showcasing every brutal attack she withstood for 15 years. Her journal entries are equal parts despair and hope. She wished Myles would change, loved him in spite of his violence, and yet still wished that she could get away. And whenever Myles declared that he would change, she hated herself for believing him. Then she would always vow to make something of herself and never return to him, but she always did. She even went back to him after he tried to kill her parents in 2015.
What?
Her life was one of fear and self-loathing, fear of what Myles would do to her and those she loved, and hating herself for not doing anything about it. She knew very well that this was a cycle that could only be repeated down the line for future generations unless something was done to stop it. It's a sad story, and it's so common. It's heartbreaking. Vanessa's father, Earl, was also a survivor of the residential school system and carried a lot of trauma associated with that time in his life. And like Sanderson's father, he was also an alcoholic, but the biggest difference between him and Sanderson's father, Vanessa noted, was that Earl never laid a finger on his wife. In 2017, Sanderson entered the home of his ex-girlfriend and made threats to his children. His terrified children took shelter in an upstairs bathtub while he punched a hole through the bathroom door. Just like The Shining, right? The Here's Johnny part. He was eventually coaxed outside and away from the children, where he threw a cement block through a car window of a friend of his girlfriend's. Also that year, Sanderson threatened a man into committing a robbery of a fast food restaurant by hitting him in the head with a firearm and stomping on his head with his boots. At the time of Sanderson's death, at the age of 32, he had racked up 59 convictions. They included 7 counts of assault, 4 counts of assault with a deadly weapon, aggravated assault, assault causing bodily harm, robbery, 2 counts of assaulting a police officer, 2 counts of resisting arrest, 3 counts of uttering threats, 3 counts of mischief, 28 counts of failing to comply with conditions, obstruction, being unlawfully at large, a breach of a conditional sentence order, breaking and entering, possession of a controlled substance, and impaired driving. The law knew him very well.
Yes, they did.
In 2018, Sanderson became angry while at the home of a friend. He stabbed 2 men with a fork and then went outside and attacked a 3rd man, beating him until he lost consciousness. When he tried to enter the home, he found the door locked and kicked it down. In that same year, when the police went looking for him at the home of his ex-girlfriend, he refused to surrender and told the police that they would have to shoot him. He was eventually taken into custody. However, once in handcuffs, he then lunged at a police officer, kicking him in the head and face. The parole board wrote a 10-page document stating that he posed high risks on a spousal assault risk assessment and a violence risk appraisal guide. And still, they set him free. I mean, the parole board said, hey, he's high risk here. And the board's like, yeah, let's go. So, quote, the board recognizes that you have a significant journey to make to change your lifestyle and attitudes to live a pro-social life. It also noted that Sanderson had participated in programs and activities for convicts and had received an employment certificate. The board also said that it was aware of an intergenerational trauma from Canada's residential school system, which in 2015, Commission concluded was considered, quote, cultural genocide. They considered his exposure to substance abuse, experiencing domestic violence during childhood, family fragmentation, lack of education, and loss of culture and spirituality. They suggested, and he participated in, a counseling program intended to help him reconnect with Indigenous culture and traditional values, as well as a, quote, high-intensity program that included dozens of sessions and ceremonies intended to help offenders control their emotions, improve their social skills, and develop goals. In February 2021, Sanderson's security classifications was reduced to a minimum. He was transferred to the Healing Lodge of his correctional facility, and then in August of 2021, he was given statutory release, which is basically parole in American terminology. But at the end, quote, the board was satisfied that your risk is manageable in the community as long as you live with, and then that part is redacted. He had maintain your sobriety and employment and continue with developing supports, including getting therapy. In other words, his conditions were that he stay away from drugs and alcohol and follow treatment plans to deal with substance abuse and violence. He was also ordered to stay away from 4 unnamed victims and that he was to have no relationships, sexual or otherwise, with women without the permission of his parole officer. And 3 months later, he was locked up again for violating the terms of his release. While on the inside, though, he was allegedly planning this attack.
Oh, really?
Yes. An inmate who served with him said Myles had talked about a revenge killing before he was released. His target was Earl Burns, Vanessa's father. Earl was helping to raise Myles and Vanessa's 4 children. When Myles Sanderson was released the last time, he effectively disappeared into the vast, wide expanse of Saskatchewan's endless prairie to eventually execute the attacks he'd been planning. To say that the James Smith Cree Nation Reserve was in shock and horror would be a total understatement. In many of these attacks, there were small children at home who either witnessed their loved ones being stabbed or were hiding somewhere within the house, concerned that Myles was going to get them as well.
Lifetime of trauma and therapy.
Lifetime. One person said his daughter cries whenever somebody knocks on the door. And she always asks, quote, has that bad man came back? Or has that bad man come back? All the people who lost loved ones, spouses, siblings, children, and friends are having trouble picking up the pieces of this shared devastation. And yes, there were ceremonies for healing, and people brought food, money, and fuel cards for the families stricken by this tragedy. Jokes were told, and people shared wonderful stories, and while that is, of course, the appropriate thing to do when a community is in mourning, it doesn't go very far to address the underlying issues that led something like this to happen in the first place. While there is no doubt that Myles committed these crimes on his own volition, one can't ignore the fact that he was raised in a petri dish of violence, substance abuse, and most importantly, despair. Cultural genocide isn't something that a community gets over in a generation. The grave misunderstanding of criminal behavior on behalf of a parole board cannot be ignored either. The system can't expect a prisoner to sign a document with a cross my heart and hope to die promise of being good and think that he's going to keep that promise just because he says he will. And while some parolees intend to keep those promises, and they do so, for some, it's not always that easy. While they may have good intentions to honor the conditions of their release, the allure of their former lives is just too much, and they find themselves back in the same old behavior. Some parolees never intend to keep any promise. They just want to escape prison. The Cree Nation community and the Canadians at large are left wondering why Myles was only given a sentence of a few years for attempted murder when every single thing in his background pointed at the fact his behavior was escalating and his control was waning. For many in the community, Sanderson's suicide robbed them of any closure. Nobody got to give a victim impact statement because there was nobody to listen to it. And of course, as always, the family of the perpetrator are victims too. Given the circumstances, Skye worried that no one would show up for Damien's funeral, but 1,900 people did. For whatever assistance Damien felt honor-bound to give his brother, he couldn't do it when push came to shove. Still, Skye is concerned that his children will be bullied at school. And for Vanessa, the mother of Myles' children, she feels the same way. And what a horrific burden for those children to have to bear that their father killed a dozen people. I mean, that's if you count his suicide. And don't forget, he nearly killed 18 others.
Which is what he wanted, but he failed, thank goodness.
And it's more than that. I mean, their father not only killed neighbors, but he also killed their uncle. He killed both of their cousins' grandfathers, including their own father. And ultimately, by taking his own life, he left them to swim through the murky waters of childhood alone. So let's just hope that they will find a brilliant, healing light and be able to one day move beyond all of this.
I don't know. I don't know how you can.
I can't believe he did so much damage in so short a period of time. Like, he just went on a rant. Like, this is serious, a rampage. He went from house to house to house.
So it's not like he snapped.
Right.
He didn't snap.
He planned something. He obviously planned to get Earl Burns, but he took so many other people down with it.
He should have never been out.
He shouldn't have.
I'm sure people were livid when they learned about his lengthy background and rap sheet. And that,
59
obviously he needed
convictions. At 32, 59 convictions, right? And he was still let out just because he gave his word that he'd do better. I mean, he followed everything, I'm assuming. He'd had to have. But he quit going to his parole officer, and then they went to search for him. But how well did they search for him? They started searching for him in May, only for him to turn up in September to do this.
Ugh, yeah. And nobody saw him during all that time? Somebody
The police
had to have.
didn't.
Yeah,
other
that's
people
what I
did.
mean. Family members didn't say, hey,
I'm assuming
buddy.
they did, but are you going to turn him in?
Yes.
It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. He wasn't found, and he did all this horrible shit. But I'm shocked that we hadn't heard of it.
Well, I think too when you look at his background initially, it seems like he's only going to harm himself, not realizing that he would harm
and his
others.
Partner, his ex-partner, right?
Yes, yeah.
But he's only gonna.
Nothing indicated like he was going to be a mass shooter, is what I'm saying.
Well, he wasn't. He stabbed all these people. He wasn't a shooter. He stabbed.
Mass killer. Sorry,
right.
I misspoke. But as a family member, that's why I think I would be. I don't know. I'm sure there were some signs that something wasn't right.
I don't know.
I would think. I think maybe he was the whole system let him down too. Let him down, thereby letting everybody else down. Meaning, like if they
and it goes back generations too. I mean, I am completely shocked that did not make it to us.
And how come it didn't?
I don't know. I mean, it was all over. I mean, there was CBC news reports on it that I watched online. It was big news up there, but it not once.
I don't remember
came down here.
It either.
I don't remember at all any of our news sources picking up on it. And there's very little news online about it. There's very little information.
Why do you think that is?
I don't know. There's very little information about any of the victims. Like, we couldn't find. Normally, when you do a case, you will find things about the victims and, like, they were well loved. They lit up a room when they walked in. That kind of stuff. There's hardly anything on it. I mean, there's a big thing on YouTube. It's like over an hour long that I watched where people got up and kind of memorialized the folks. But there's really not much on it online.
Interesting.
But anyway, there's day 10.
Day 10. That was something. Woo! Now I'm gonna go. I'm gonna go online and try to look.
Look him up.
Because I can't.
The guy was over 6 foot. He was 250 pounds. He just overtook drug fueled Rampage?
I don't know. I would say mental illness definitely in
Something, yeah. Something. But there's a couple good articles that I'll have linked in the sources of Sky did an interview, and I believe Vanessa did an interview too.
Mm-hmm. Good job, Jen.
This woman put up with a lot of it, I'm telling you. So, all right.
That's what I said. There's always signs. There's always signs. I just wish somebody had seen it earlier. Anyway, good job. Tomorrow back to me.
Yep.
It's
day 11. We're getting closer. We're closing that door.
It's a killing duo. And it's not good, let me tell you.
We hope everybody's doing well and everything is getting done.
Hope the groceries are in, the cookies are made, the house smells good.
Pies
with
getting
cookies,
baked,
I mean.
Right?
Yeah.
I hope those relatives that you don't want to see have canceled.
Thank you. Or they at least come and go quickly.
Exactly.
Exactly.
So we hope it all's going your way. All right, let's go.
Until next time, remember, lock your doors.
Keep passing by those open windows.
Bye-bye.
Love ya. For more information about this episode, as well as all other sources, please check out our show notes or the podcast website at ourtruecrimepodcast.com. Our True Crime Podcast is developed and created by the hosts, Jen and Cam. Original music and audio mix of all our True Crime Podcast episodes is courtesy of Nico Vertese from We Talk of Dreams. You can reach Nico at wetalkofdreams.com. Listener discretion is provided by Edward October from OctoberPod VHS. You can find all of his great works on YouTube. Please make sure to like and subscribe to our True Crime Podcast wherever you listen to your podcasts. We can be reached on Instagram and Facebook at Our True Crime Podcast or on Twitter with the handle at Our True Crime Pod. You can also email us at ourtruecrimepodcast@gmail.com. We would also at this time like to thank our patrons. We would be so lost without you. Thank you so much. And if you would like to help support the show, you can check us out on patreon.com/Our True Crime Podcast. You can also show your support by leaving a 5-star review on Apple or simply just tell your friends about us. It's that easy. Love ya.